Chapter 13. My next attempt at seeing took place on September 3rd, 1969. Don Juan made me smoke 2 bowls of the mixture. The immediate effects were identical to those I had experienced during previous attempts. I remember that when my body was thoroughly numb, Don Juan held me by my right armpit and made me walk into the thick desert chaparral that grows for miles around his house. I cannot recollect what I or Don Juan did after we entered the brush, nor can I recall how long we walked. At a certain moment, I found I was sitting on top of a small hill. Don Juan was sitting on my left side, touching me. I could not feel him, but I could see him with the corner of my eye. I had the feeling that he had been talking to me, although I could not remember his words. Yet I felt I knew exactly what he had said, in spite of the fact that I could not bring it back into my clear memory. I had the sensation that his words were like the cars of a train, which was moving away, and his last word was like a square caboose. I knew what that last word was, but I could not say it or think clearly about it. It was a state of half-wakefulness with a dreamlike image of a train of words. Then very faintly I heard Don Juan's voice talking to me. "Now you must look at me," he said, as he turned my head to face him. He repeated the statement 3 or 4 times. I looked and detected right away the same glowing effect I had perceived twice before while looking at his face. It was a mesmerizing movement, an undulatory shift or light with contained areas. Shift of light with contained areas. There were no definite boundaries to those areas, and yet the waving light never spilled over but moved within invisible limits. I scanned the glowing object in front of me, and immediately it started to lose its glow, and the familiar features of Don Juan's face emerged, or rather became superimposed on the fading glow. I must have then focused my gaze again. Don Juan's features faded and the glow intensified. I had placed my attention on an area which must have been his left eye. I noticed that there the movement of the glow was not contained. I detected something perhaps resembling explosions of sparks. The explosions were rhythmical and actually sent out something like particles of light that flew out with apparent force toward me and then retreated as if they were rubber fibers. Don Juan must have turned my head around. Suddenly I found myself looking at a plowed field. "Now look ahead," I heard Don Juan saying. In front of me, perhaps 200 yards away, was a large, long hill. Its entire slope had been plowed. Horizontal furrows ran parallel to each other from the bottom to the very top of the hill. I noticed that in the plowed field there were quantities of small rocks and 3 huge boulders that interrupted the lineality of the furrows. There were some bushes right in front of me which prevented me from observing the details of a ravine or water canyon at the bottom of the hill. From where I was, the canyon appeared as a deep cut with green vegetation markedly different from the barren hill. The greenness seemed to be trees that grew in the bottom of the canyon. I felt a breeze blowing in my eyes. I had a feeling of peace and profound quietness. There were no sounds of birds or insects. Don Juan spoke to me again. It took me a moment to understand what he was saying. "Do you see a man in that field?" he kept on asking. I wanted to tell him that there was no man in that field, but I could not vocalize the words. Don Juan took my head in his hands from behind. I could see his fingers over my eyebrows and on my cheeks, and made me pan over the field, moving my head slowly from right to left, and then in the opposite direction. "Watch every detail. Your life may depend on it," I heard him saying over and over. He made me pan 4 times over the 180-degree visual horizon in front of me. At one moment, when he had moved my head to face the extreme left, I thought I detected something moving in the field. I had a brief perception of movement with the corner of my right eye. He began to shift my head back to my right, and I was capable of focusing my gaze on the plowed field. I saw a man walking alongside the furrows. He was a plain man dressed like a Mexican peasant. He wore sandals, a pair of light gray pants, a long-sleeved beige shirt, and a straw hat, and carried a light brown bag with a strap over his right shoulder. Don Juan must have noticed that I had seen the man. He asked me repeatedly if the man was looking at me or if he was coming towards me. I wanted to tell him that the man was walking away and that his back was turned to me, but I could only say no. Don Juan said that if the man turned and came to me, I should yell, and he would turn my head away in order to protect me. I had no sense of fear or apprehension or involvement. I coldly watched the scene. The man stopped walking at the middle of the field. He stood with his right foot on a ledge of a large round boulder, as if he were tying his sandal. Then he straightened up, pulled a string from his bag, and wrapped it around his left hand. He turned his back to me, and facing the top of the hill, began scanning the area in front of him. I thought he was scanning because of the way he moved his head, which he kept turning slowly to his right. I saw him in profile, and then he began to turn his whole body toward me until he was looking at me. He actually jerked his head, or moved it in such a way that I knew beyond a doubt that he had seen me. He extended his left arm in front of him, pointing to the ground, and holding his arm in that position, he began to walk toward me. "He's coming," I yelled without any difficulty. Don Juan must have turned my head around, for next I was looking at the chaparral. He told me not to gaze, but look lightly at things and scan over them. He said that he was going to stand a short distance in front of me and then walk toward me, and that I should gaze at him until I saw his glow. I saw Don Juan moving to a spot perhaps 20 yards away. He walked with such incredible speed and agility that I could hardly believe it was Don Juan. He turned around and faced me and ordered me to gaze at him. His face was glowing. It looked like a blotch of light. The light seemed to spill over his chest almost to the middle of his body. It was as if I were looking at a light through my half-closed eyelids. The glow seemed to expand and recede. He must have begun to walk toward me because the light became more intense and more discernible. He said something to me. I struggled to understand and lost my view of the glow, and then I saw Don Juan as I see him in everyday life. He was a couple of feet from me. He sat down facing me. As I pinpointed my attention on his face, I began to perceive a vague glow. Then it was as if his face were crisscrossed by thin beams of light. Don Juan's face looked as if someone were shining tiny mirrors on it. As the light became more intense, the face lost its contours and was again an amorphous glowing object. I perceived once more the effect of pulsating explosions of light emanating from an area which must have been his left eye. I did not focus my attention on it, but deliberately gazed at an adjacent area which I surmised to be his right eye. I caught at once the sight of a clear, transparent pool of light. It was a liquid light. I noticed that perceiving was more than sighting. It was feeling. The pool of dark liquid light had an extraordinary depth. It was friendly, kind. The light that emanated from it did not explode, but whirled slowly inward, creating exquisite reflections. The glow had a very lovely and delicate way of touching me, of soothing me, which gave me a sensation of its exquisiteness. I saw a symmetrical ring of brilliant dashes of light that expanded rhythmically on the vertical plane of the glowing area. The ring expanded to cover nearly all the glowing surface and then contracted to a point of light in the middle of the brilliant pool. I saw the ring expanding and contracting several times. Then I deliberately moved back without losing my gaze and was capable of seeing both eyes. I distinguished the rhythm of both types of light explosions. The left eye sent out dashes of light that actually protruded out of the vertical plane, while the right eye sent out dashes that radiated without protruding. The rhythm of my two eyes was alternating. The light of the left eye exploded outward, while the radiating light beams of the right eye contracted and whirled inward. Then the light of the right eye extended to cover the whole glowing surface, while the exploding light of the left eye receded. Don Juan must have turned me around once more, for I was again looking at the plowed field. I heard him telling me to watch the man. The man was standing by the boulder looking at me. I could not distinguish his features. His hat covered most of his face. After a moment, he tucked his bag under his right arm and began to walk away toward my right. He walked almost to the end of the plowed area, changed direction, and took a few steps toward the gully. Then I lost control of my focusing, and he vanished, and so did the total scenery. The image of the desert shrubs became superimposed on it. I do not recollect how I returned to Don Juan's house, nor do I remember what he did to me to bring me back. When I woke up, I was lying on my straw mat in Don Juan's room. He came to my side and helped me up. I was dizzy. My stomach was upset. Don Juan, in a very quick and efficient manner, dragged me to the shrubs at the side of his house. I got sick, and he laughed. Afterwards, I felt better. I looked at my watch. It was 11 p.m. I went back to sleep, and by 1 o'clock the next afternoon, I thought I was myself again. Don Juan kept asking me how I felt. I had the sensation of being absent-minded. I could not really concentrate. I walked around the house for a while under Don Juan's close scrutiny. He followed me around. I felt there was nothing to do, and I went back to sleep. I woke up in the late afternoon feeling much better. I found a great many mashed leaves around me. In fact, when I woke up, I was lying on my stomach on top of a pile of leaves. Their scent was very strong. I remember becoming aware of the scent before I fully woke up. I wandered to the back and found Don Juan sitting by the irrigation ditch. When he saw me approaching, he made frantic gestures to make me stop and go back into the house. "Run inside," he yelled. I ran into the house, and he joined me a while later. "Don't ever come after me," he said. "If you want to see me, wait for me here." I apologized. He told me not to waste myself in silly apologies, which did not have the power to cancel my acts. He said that he had had a very difficult time bringing me back, and that he had been interceding for me at the water. "We have to take a chance now and wash you in the water," he said. I assured him I felt fine. He gazed into my eyes for a long time. "Come with me," he said. "I'm going to put you in the water." "I'm fine," I said. "Look, I'm taking notes." He pulled me up from my mat with considerable force. "Don't indulge," he said. "In no time at all, you will fall asleep again. Maybe I won't be able to wake you up this time." We ran to the back of his house. Before we reached the water, he told me in a most dramatic tone to shut my eyes tight and not open them until he said to. He told me that if I gazed at the water even for an instant, I might die. He led me by the hand and dunked me into the irrigation ditch head first. I kept my eyes shut as he went on submerging and pulling me out of the water for hours. The change I experienced was remarkable. Whatever was wrong with me before I entered the water was so subtle that I did not really notice it until I compared it with the feeling of well-being and alertness I had while Don Juan kept me in the irrigation canal. Water got into my nose and I began to sneeze. Don Juan pulled me out and led me, with my eyes still closed, into the house. He made me change my clothes and then guided me into his room, had me sit down on my mat, arranged the direction of my body, and then told me to open my eyes. I opened them, and what I saw caused me to jump back and grab onto his leg. I experienced a tremendously confusing moment. Don Juan rapped me with his knuckles on the very top of my head. It was a quick blow, which was not hard or painful, but somehow shocking. "What is the matter with you? What did you see?" he asked. Upon opening my eyes, I had seen the same scene I had watched before. I had seen the same man. This time, however, he was almost touching me. I saw his face. There was an air of familiarity about it. I almost knew who he was. The scene vanished when Don Juan hit me on the head. I looked up at Don Juan. He had his hand ready to hit me again. He laughed and asked if I would like to get another blow. I let go of his leg and relaxed on my mat. He ordered me to look straight ahead and not to turn around for any reason in the direction of the water at the back of his house. I then noticed for the first time that it was pitch black in the room. For a moment I was not sure whether I had my eyes open. I touched them with my hands to make sure. I called Don Juan loudly and told him something was wrong with my eyes. I could not see at all, while a moment before I had seen him ready to hit me. I heard his laughter over my head to my right, and then he lit his kerosene lantern. My eyes adapted to the light in a matter of seconds. Everything was as it always had been. The wattle and daub walls of the room and the strangely contorted dry medicinal roots hanging on them, the bundles of herbs, the thatched roof, the kerosene lantern hanging from a beam. I had seen the room hundreds of times, yet this time there was something unique about it, and about myself. This was the first time I did not believe in the final reality of my perception. I had been edging toward that feeling, and I had perhaps intellectualized it at various times, but never had I been at the brink of a serious doubt. This time, however, I did not believe the room was real, and for a moment I had the strange sensation that it was a scene which would vanish if Don Juan rapped me on top of my head with his knuckles. I began to shiver without being cold. Nervous spasms ran down my spine. My head felt heavy, especially in the area right above my neck. I complained that I did not feel well and told him what I had seen. He laughed at me, saying that to succumb to fright was a miserable indulgence. "You're frightened without being afraid," he said. "You saw the ally staring at you. Big deal. Wait until you have him face to face before you shit in your pants." He told me to get up and walk to my car without turning around in the direction of the water, and to wait for him while he got a rope and a shovel. He made me drive to a place where he had found a tree stump. We proceeded to dig it out in the darkness. I worked terribly hard for hours. We did not get the stump out, but I felt much better. We went back to his house and ate, and things were again perfectly real and commonplace. "What happened to me?" I asked. "What did I do yesterday?" "You smoked me, and then you smoked an ally," he said. "I beg your pardon?" Don Juan laughed and said that next I was going to demand that he start telling me everything from the beginning. "You smoked me," he repeated. "You gazed into my face, into my eyes. You saw the lights that mark a man's face. I'm a sorcerer. You saw that in my eyes. You did not know that, though, because this is the first time you've done it. The eyes of men are not all alike. You will soon find that out. Then you smoked an ally. Do you mean the man in the field? That was not a man. That was an ally beckoning you. Where did we go? Where were we when I saw that man? I mean, that ally. Don Juan made a gesture with his chin to point out an area in front of his house and said that he had taken me to the top of a small hill. I said that the scenery I had viewed had nothing to do with the desert chaparral around his house, and he replied that the ally that had beckoned me was not from the surroundings. Where is it from? I'll take you there very soon. What is the meaning of my vision? You were learning to see, that was all. But now you are about to lose your pants because you indulge. You have abandoned yourself to your fright. Maybe you should describe everything you saw. When I started to describe the way his own face had appeared to me, he made me stop and said that it was of no importance whatsoever. I told him that I had almost seen him as a luminous egg. He said that almost was not enough, and that seeing was going to take me a great deal of time and work. He was interested in the scene of the plowed field and in every detail I could remember about the man. That ally was beckoning you, he said. I made you move your head when he came to you, not because he was endangering you, but because it is better to wait. You are not in a hurry. A warrior is never idle and never in a hurry. To meet an ally without being prepared is like attacking a lion with your farts. I liked the metaphor. We had a delightful moment of laughter. What would have happened if you hadn't moved my head? You would have had to move your head yourself. And if I didn't, the ally would have come to you and scared you stiff. If you had been alone, he might have killed you. It is not advisable for you to be alone in the mountains or the desert until you can defend yourself. An ally might catch you alone there and make mincemeat out of you. What was the meaning of the acts he performed? By looking at you, he meant he welcomes you. He showed you that you need a spirit catcher and a pouch, but not from this area. His bag was from another part of the country. You have 3 stumbling blocks in your way that make you stop. Those were the boulders. And you definitely are going to get your best powers in water canyons and gullies. The ally pointed out the gully to you. The rest of the scene was meant to help you locate the exact place to find him. I know now where the place is. I will take you there very soon. Do you mean that the scenery I saw really exists? Of course. Where? I cannot tell you that. How would I find that area? I cannot tell you that either, and not because I don't want to, but because I simply don't know how to tell you. I wanted to know the meaning of seeing the same scene while I was in his room. Don Juan laughed and imitated me holding on to his leg. That was a reaffirmation that the ally wants you, he said. He made sure you or I knew that he was welcoming you. What about the face I saw? It is a familiar face to you because you know him. You have seen it before. Maybe it is the face of your death. You got frightened, but that was your carelessness. He was waiting for you, and when he showed up, you succumbed to fright. Fortunately, I was there to hit you, or he would have turned against you, which would have been only proper. To meet an ally, a man must be a spotless warrior, or the ally may turn against him and destroy him. Don Juan dissuaded me from going back to Los Angeles the next morning. Apparently, he thought I still had not totally recovered. He insisted that I sit inside his room facing the southeast in order to preserve my strength. He sat to my left, handed me my notebook, and said that this time I had him pinned down. He not only had to stay with me, he also had to talk to me. I have to take you to the water again in the twilight, he said. You're not solid yet, and you shouldn't be alone today. I'll keep you company all morning. In the afternoon, you'll be in better shape. His concern made me feel very apprehensive. "What's wrong with me?" I asked. "You've tapped an ally." "What do you mean by that?" "We must not talk about allies today. Let us talk about anything else." I really did not want to talk at all. I began to feel anxious and restless. Don Juan apparently found the situation utterly ludicrous. He laughed till the tears came. "Don't tell me that at a time when you should talk you are not going to find anything to say," he said, his eyes shining with mischievous glint. His mood was very soothing to me. There was only one topic that interested me at the moment, the ally. His face was so familiar. It was not as if I knew him or as if I had seen him before. It was something else. Every time I began to think about his face, my mind experienced a bombardment of other thoughts, as if some part of myself knew the secret but did not allow the rest of me to come close to it. The sensation of the ally's face being familiar was so eerie that it had forced me into a state of morbid melancholy. Don Juan had said that it might have been the face of my death. I think that statement had clinched me. I wanted desperately to ask about it, and I had the clear sensation that Don Juan was holding me back. I took a couple of deep breaths and blurted out a question. "What is death, Don Juan?" "I don't know," he said, smiling. "I mean, how would you describe death? I want your opinions. I think everybody has definite opinions about death." "I don't know what you're talking about. I had the Tibetan Book of the Dead in the trunk of my car. It occurred to me to use it as a topic of conversation, since it dealt with death. I said I was going to read it to him, and he began to get up. He made me sit down and went out and got the book himself. The morning is a bad time for sorcerers," he said as an explanation for my having to stay put. "You're too weak to leave my room. Inside here you are protected. If you were to wander off now, chances are that you would find a terrible disaster. An ally could kill you on the road or in the bush, and later on when they found your body, they would say that you had either died mysteriously or had an accident." I was in no position or mood to question his decisions, so I stayed put nearly all morning reading and explaining some parts of the book to him. He listened attentively and did not interrupt me at all. Twice I had to stop for short periods of time while he brought some water and food, but as soon as he was free again, he urged me to continue reading. He seemed to be very interested. When I finished, he looked at me. "I don't understand why those people talk about death as if death were like life," he said softly. "Maybe that's the way they understand it. Do you think the Tibetans see?" "Hardly. When a man learns to see, not a single thing he knows prevails. Not a single one. If the Tibetans could see, they could tell right away that not a single thing is any longer the same. Once we see, nothing is known. Nothing remains as we used to know it when we didn't see." "Perhaps, Don Juan, seeing is not the same for everyone." "True, it's not the same. Still, that does not mean that the meanings of life prevail. When one learns to see, not a single thing is the same." "Tibetans obviously think that death is like life. What do you think death is like yourself?" I asked. "I don't think death is like anything, and I think the Tibetans must be talking about something else. At any rate, what they're talking about is not death." "What do you think they're talking about?" "Maybe you can tell me that. You're the one who reads." I tried to say something else, but he began to laugh. "Perhaps the Tibetans really see," Don Juan went on, "in which case they must have realized that what they see makes no sense at all, and they wrote that bunch of crap because it doesn't make any difference to them, in which case what they wrote is not crap at all." I really don't care about what the Tibetans have to say, I said, but I certainly care about what you have to say. I would like to hear what you think about death. He stared at me for an instant and then giggled. He opened his eyes and raised his eyebrows in a comical gesture of surprise. Death is a whirl, he said. Death is the face of the ally. Death is a shiny cloud over the horizon. Death is the whisper of Mescalito in your ears. Death is the toothless mouth of the guardian. Death is Gennaro sitting on his head. Death is me talking. Death is you and your writing pad. Death is nothing. Nothing. It is here, yet it isn't here at all. Don Juan laughed with great delight. His laughter was like a song. It had a sort of dancing rhythm. I make no sense, huh? Don Juan said. I cannot tell you what death is like, but perhaps I could tell you about your own death. There is no way of knowing what it will be like for sure. However, I could tell you what it may be like. I became frightened at that point and argued that I only wanted to know what death appeared to be like to him. I emphasized that I was interested in his opinions about death in a general sense, but did not care to know about the particulars of anybody's personal death, especially my own. I can't talk about death except in personal terms, he said. You wanted me to tell you about death? All right, then don't be afraid of hearing about your own death. I admitted that I was too nervous to talk about it. I said that I wanted to talk about death in general terms, as he himself had done when he told me that at the time of his son Eulalio's death, life and death mixed like a fog of crystals. I told you that my son's life expanded at the time of his personal death, he said. I was not talking about death in general, but about my son's death. Death, whatever it is, made his life expand. I definitely wanted to steer the conversation out of the realm of particulars, and mentioned that I had been reading accounts of people who had died for several minutes and had been revived through medical techniques. In all the cases I had read, the persons involved had made statements upon reviving that they could not recollect anything at all, that dying was simply a sensation of blacking out. That's perfectly understandable, he said. Death has two stages. The first is a blackout. It is a meaningless stage, very similar to the first effect of Mescalito, in which one experiences a lightness that makes one feel happy, complete, and that everything in the world is at ease. But that is only a shallow state. It soon vanishes and one enters a new realm, a realm of harshness and power. That second stage is the real encounter with Mescalito. Death is very much like this. The first stage is a shallow blackout. The second, however, is the real stage where one meets with death. It is a brief moment. After the first blackout, when we find that we are somehow ourselves again, it is then that death smashes against us with quiet fury and power until it dissolves our lives into nothing. How can you be sure that you are talking about death? I have my ally. The little smoke has shown me my unmistakable death with great clarity. This is why I can only talk about personal death. Don Juan's words caused me a profound apprehension and a dramatic ambivalence. I had a feeling that he was going to describe the overt, commonplace details of my death and tell me how or when I was going to die. The mere thought of knowing that made me despair and at the same time provoked my curiosity. I could have asked him to describe his own death, of course, but I felt that such a request would be rather rude, and I ruled it out automatically. Don Juan seemed to be enjoying my conflict. His body convulsed with laughter. Do you want to know what your death may be like? He asked me with childlike delight in his face. I found his mischievous pleasure in teasing me rather comforting. It almost took the edge off my apprehension. "Okay, tell me," I said, and my voice cracked. He had a formidable explosion of laughter. He held his stomach and rolled on his side and mockingly repeated, "Okay, tell me," with a crack in his voice. Then he straightened out and sat down, assuming a feigned stiffness. And in a tremulous voice he said, "The second stage of your death may very well be as follows." His eyes examined me with apparently genuine curiosity. I laughed. I clearly realized that his making fun was the only device that could dull the edge of the idea of one's death. "You drive a great deal," he went on saying, "so you may find yourself at a given moment behind the wheel again. It will be a very fast sensation that won't give you time to think. Suddenly, let's say, you would find yourself driving as you have done thousands of times. But before you could wonder about yourself, you would notice a strange formation in front of your windshield. If you looked closer, you'd realize that it is a cloud that looks like a shiny whirl. It would resemble, let's say, a face right in the middle of the sky in front of you. As you watched it, you would see it moving backwards until it was only a brilliant point in the distance. And then you would notice that it began moving towards you again. It would pick up speed, and in a blink of an eye, it would smash against the windshield of your car. You were strong. I'm sure it would take death a couple of whams to get you. By then, you would know where you were and what was happening to you. The face would recede again to a position on the horizon, would pick up speed and smash against you. The face would enter inside you, and then you'd know it was the Ally's face all the time, or it was me talking, or you writing. Death was nothing all the time, nothing. It was a little dot lost in the sheets of your notebook. And yet it would enter inside you with uncontrollable force and would make you expand. It would make you flat and extend you over the sky and the earth and beyond. And you would be like a fog of tiny crystals moving away. I was very taken by his description of my death. I had expected to hear something so different. I could not say anything for a long time. "Death enters through the belly," he continued, "right through the gap of the will. That area is the most important and sensitive part of man. It is the area of the will, and also the area through which all of us die. I know it because my ally has guided me to that stage. A sorcerer tunes his will by letting his death overtake him, and when he is flat and begins to expand, his impeccable will takes over and assembles the fog into one person again." Don Juan made a strange gesture. He opened his hands like two fans, lifted them to the level of his elbows, turned them until his thumbs were touching his sides, and then brought them slowly together at the center of his body, over his navel. He kept them there for a moment. His arms shivered with the strain. Then he brought them up until the tips of his middle fingers touched his forehead, and then pulled them down in the same position to the center of his body. It was a formidable gesture. Don Juan had performed it with such force and beauty that I was spellbound. "It is his will which assembles a sorcerer," he said. "But as his old age makes him feeble, his will wanes, and a moment unavoidably comes when he is no longer capable of commanding his will. He then has nothing with which to oppose the silent force of his death, and his life becomes like the lives of all his fellow men, an expanding fog moving beyond its limits." Don Juan stared at me and stood up. I was shivering. "You can go to the bushes now," he said. "It is afternoon." I needed to go, but I did not dare. I felt perhaps more jumpy than afraid. However, I was no longer apprehensive about the ally. Don Juan said that it did not matter how I felt as long as I was solid. He assured me I was in perfect shape and could safely go into the bushes as long as I did not get close to the water. That is another matter, he said. I need to wash you once more, so stay away from the water. Later on, he wanted me to drive him to the nearby town. I mentioned that driving would be a welcome change for me because I was still shaky. The idea that a sorcerer actually played with his death was quite gruesome to me. To be a sorcerer is a terrible burden, he said in a reassuring tone. I've told you that it is much better to learn to see. A man who sees is everything in comparison. The sorcerer is a sad fellow. What is sorcery, Don Juan? He looked at me for a long time as he shook his head almost imperceptibly. Sorcery is to apply one's will to a key joint, he said. Sorcery is interference. A sorcerer searches and finds the key joint of anything he wants to affect, and then he applies his will to it. A sorcerer doesn't have to see to be a sorcerer. All he has to know is how to use his will. I asked him to explain what he meant by a key joint. He thought for a while, and then he said that he knew what my car was. It's obviously a machine, I said. I mean, your car is the spark plugs. That's its key joint for me. I can apply my will to it, and your car won't work. Don Juan got into my car and sat down. He beckoned me to do likewise as he made himself comfortable on the seat. Watch what I do, he said. I'm a crow, so first I'll make my feathers loose. He shivered his entire body. His movement reminded me of a sparrow wetting its feathers in a puddle. He lowered his head like a bird dipping its beak into the water. That feels really good, he said, and began to laugh. His laughter was strange. It had a very peculiar mesmerizing effect on me. I recollected having heard him laugh in that manner many times before. Perhaps the reason I had never become overtly aware of it was that he had never laughed like that long enough in my presence. A crow loosens its neck next, he said, and began twisting his neck and rubbing his cheeks on his shoulders. Then he looks at the world with one eye and then with the other. His head shook as he allegedly shifted his view of the world from one eye to the other. The pitch of his laughter became higher. I had the absurd feeling that he was going to turn into a crow in front of my eyes. I wanted to laugh it off, but I was almost paralyzed. I actually felt some kind of enveloping force around me. I was not afraid, nor was I dizzy or sleepy. My faculties were unimpaired, to the best of my judgment. Turn on your car now, Don Juan said. I turned on the starter and automatically stepped on the gas pedal. The starter began to grind without igniting the engine. Don Juan's laughter was a soft, rhythmical cackle. I tried it again, and again. I spent perhaps 10 minutes grinding the starter of my car. Don Juan cackled all the time. Then I gave up and sat there with a heavy head. He stopped laughing and scrutinized me, and I knew then that his laughter had forced me into a sort of hypnotic trance. Although I had been thoroughly aware of what was taking place, I felt I was not myself. During the time I could not start my car, I was very docile, almost numb. It was as if Don Juan was not only doing something to my car, but also to me. When he stopped cackling, I was convinced the spell was over, and impetuously I turned on the starter again. I had the certainty Don Juan had only mesmerized me with his laughter and made me believe I could not start my car. With the corner of my eye, I saw him looking curiously at me as I ground the motor and pumped the gas furiously. Don Juan patted me gently and said that fury would make me solid, and perhaps I would not need to be washed in the water again. The more furious I could get, the quicker I could recover from my encounter with the ally. "Don't be embarrassed," I heard Don Juan saying. "Kick the car." His natural everyday laughter exploded, and I felt ridiculous and laughed sheepishly. After a while, Don Juan said he had released the car. It started.